The year was 1473. The emperor was still strong, but war had taken many sons. In the shadow of the southern hills, far from the palace and its golden walls, there was a small village. And just beyond that village, hidden by trees and time, there stood a broken house. It had one room, one door, and one woman inside. Her name was Maylene. She was 24 years old, a widow, a mother. She lived there with her son Chen, who was 6, and her daughter Lian, who was 4. They had no servants, no relatives, no visitors. Only silence. Maylene's husband had been a soldier. He went to war when Lian was still a baby. He never came back. No body, no message. Only a folded robe and a sack of rice sent by the army as payment. That was 2 winters ago. Since then, Maylene had done everything to survive. She sewed clothes for passing traders. She picked herbs for the village healer. She cleaned the old temple steps when no one else wanted to. But it was never enough. Some nights she gave her food to the children and drank only hot water. Some days they had no fire. Still she smiled. For them, she always smiled. That night it rained, hard rain. Wind shook the trees. Thunder rolled through the sky like drums from heaven. The children were asleep under a patched blanket. Maylene sat near the door holding a bowl of tea that had gone cold. She listened to the storm, listened for wolves. Then she heard something else, a sound like hooves, then a cry, then silence. She stood up, slowly. She opened the door. Outside, just beyond the edge of the lantern's light, there was a horse, a dark one. Its legs trembled. Its saddle was torn. Beside it, a man lay face down in the mud. Maylene stepped out barefoot. The rain hit her like needles. She ran to him. His robe was soaked. His hands were cold. His lips were pale. She turned him over. He was young, no more than 30. His face was cut, his chest was bleeding, but he was alive, just barely. She looked at the children inside, then at the man. Then she whispered, "Hold on." And she began to pull. Maylene was not strong, but she had carried firewood and water for years. She had carried both her children when they had fevers. She pulled the man inch by inch through the doorway. The floor became wet with mud and blood. She laid him near the fire. The children woke. Chen sat up. "Mama, who is that?" "I don't know," she said, "but he's hurt." Lian rubbed her eyes. "Is he going to die?" "Not tonight," Maylene said. She cleaned the man's face with warm cloth. She boiled water. She ground dried roots and ginger in a bowl. She found a piece of her old robe and tore it into strips. She spoke no words. Of magic, no prayers, only kindness. She worked through the night. When the fire burned low, she added her last sticks of wood. When the wind pushed through the cracks, she covered the children with her shawl. When the man groaned in pain, she touched his hand. "You're safe," she whispered. "You can stay." By morning, the rain had stopped. The sun broke through the clouds like gold on gray silk. The man was still breathing. He opened his eyes once, saw her face, and closed them again. He did not speak, but something in his face changed, like he had landed on the edge of a dream and decided to stay. Maylene stayed by his side. She fed the children what was left of the rice. She gave the man spoonfuls of broth even when he did not wake. He did not speak for 3 days, but he did not die. On the 4th day, his eyes opened. He looked around, then at her. He tried to sit up, but his side ached. She touched his shoulder. "Don't move yet." He stared at her. His lips were dry. She gave him water. He drank slowly. Then he said, "Where am I?" She said, "In my home." He looked at the children. They were sitting near the window playing with stones. "You live here?" he asked. She nodded. "With them." He looked down. His voice was quiet. "You helped me." She said nothing. Then she stood and brought him a bowl of soup. He took it in both hands. When he tasted it, his eyes closed for a moment. Then he opened them again. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him. "What's your name?" He paused, then said, "Jinn." She nodded once, and that was enough. Jinn did not speak much after that first day. He ate slowly, rested often, and sat by the fire without saying a word. Sometimes his eyes followed the smoke as if searching for something far away, something he had lost long ago. Maylin did not press him. She had learned through long days and longer nights that healing often began in silence. Some wounds needed words, others only needed warmth. She changed his bandages with soft hands. She pressed herbs into paste and cleaned his skin with care. She did not flinch at his bruises. She did not ask about them. Her children watched everything. At first, Chen stayed close to the wall. Leon peeked from behind the water jar, but curiosity was stronger than fear. Soon, the children sat near his blanket and left small gifts beside him. Smooth stones, dried leaves, a painted wooden bird. He never said thank you, but once when Leon placed a yellow flower near his bowl, he kept it. He didn't wear it, didn't mention it, but Maylin saw it later, pressed between the pages of a book he couldn't read. She said nothing, but her heart felt something warm and quiet begin to grow. The house was still small, still broken in, the corners, still cold at night, but somehow it began to feel full. Jinn started to sit up more, then stand, then walk a little, leaning against the wall. His steps were heavy but steady. Maylin made the soup thicker, let the fire burn longer. She gave him half her steamed bun without being asked. He began to help even when he was tired. He carried in wood. He fixed the broken stool. He patched the hole in the door with quiet hands. He never explained why, and Maylin never asked. One evening when the sun was low and the children were sleeping, Maylin sat by the window with her sewing. Jinn sat nearby, carving a small piece of wood with a pocket knife. The only sound was the wind outside and the soft scrape of blade on bark. When he finished, he placed the shape on the table. It was a bird, wings stretched, simple and smooth. He didn't say who it was for, but that night, Maylin found it resting on her folded shawl. She picked it up and held it in her hand for a long time. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't perfect, but it was gentle, and it was his. The days passed slowly. The wound on Jinn's chest faded to a scar. His eyes were clearer. Now, he no longer coughed in his sleep, but he stayed. He didn't leave when the road dried, didn't ride off when the sky turned blue again. He simply stayed. He helped gather herbs. He carried water. He taught Chen how to use a stick like a sword. He lifted Leon into the tree when she wanted to see the sky. He said little, but he saw everything. And he never once looked at Maylin like she was a burden. One morning, while Maylin prepared tea, Jinn took her shawl from the wall and placed it gently over her shoulders. He didn't speak, but his hands lingered for a moment. Not long, not bold, just enough. She didn't move. When he stepped away, her breath felt different, warmer, quieter. That evening, she watched him from the doorway while he lit the lantern. The light touched his face, his scar, his steady hands. He looked like a man who belonged somewhere else. A palace, a noble house. Somewhere important, but he was here with them, and somehow that made her feel like she mattered. She didn't know who he truly was, but she knew this. Since he had arrived, the house no longer felt empty. Her children laughed more. The wind didn't feel so cruel. The nights didn't feel so long. And when she lay down to sleep, she stopped dreaming of the man she had lost, because someone new was sitting quietly by the fire. Not to replace, but to remind her that her heart still had room. Spring came slowly that year. The snow melted first in the trees, then along the roof, then in small rivers across the dirt path in front of the house. The wind was still sharp, but the light began to change. Softer, warmer, like it remembered how to be kind again. Maylin planted new herbs behind the house. Chen helped by digging crooked rows with a spoon. Leon followed behind, dropping seeds with chubby fingers. Jinn stood nearby holding a bucket of water, his sleeves rolled up to the elbows. The children looked at him as if he were something steady, something safe. He didn't speak much, but they didn't need him to. That morning something small happened. Leanne tripped while playing and fell into the bucket Jinn had just filled. Water splashed everywhere. Her dress was soaked. She sat on the ground, blinking, confused. Then Jinn did something no one expected. He laughed. It wasn't loud or long. Just a soft sound, quiet and deep, like the first breath after a hard winter. Maylene looked up from the soil. She had never heard his laugh before. For a moment, she forgot the cold under her nails. She forgot the ache in her lower back. She forgot everything. Because he had laughed and his eyes had crinkled at the corners. And for that small moment, he wasn't a stranger with scars. He was a man who had found joy again. She smiled without meaning to, and when he noticed, he didn't look away. Later that evening, the house was quiet again. The children were asleep on the floor, curled up beneath the old quilt. Maylene sat by the fire, sewing a patch onto Jinn's torn robe. He watched her, from across the room. He didn't speak, just watched the way her fingers moved, the way she leaned close to the light, the way her lips pressed together in focus. He didn't tell her, but he hadn't worn that robe in days. He had torn it weeks ago, but he had placed it in her hands that morning just to see what she would do. She hadn't asked why. She had simply taken it with a nod. Now, as she worked, the firelight made her skin glow like soft gold. Her hair had come loose again. A small curl brushed her cheek, but she didn't notice. Jinn wanted to reach out and tuck it behind her ear. He didn't, but the thought stayed. The next day, Maylene walked into the woods to gather spring leaves for tea. She knew which trees to search and how to cut the tips without hurting the roots. The forest knew her well, and she moved through it without fear. But this time, Jinn followed. He didn't say where he was going. He simply picked up the basket and walked behind her. Maylene didn't stop him. They didn't speak. Birds moved through the trees. A stream ran nearby. The air smelled of moss and new blossoms. When she knelt to pick a cluster of pale green shoots, Jinn crouched beside her. Their shoulders almost touched. She didn't move away. She could hear his breath, slow, deep, calm. When she stood, he offered his hand to steady her. She took it, just for a second, but it was enough. That night, when the children were asleep, Jinn sat near the door, sharpening his small knife. Maylene sat beside him, mending a tear in her own sleeve. For a long time, there was only the sound of the blade against stone. Then gently, Jinn placed something beside her. It was another carving. This one was smaller than the bird, a flower with wide petals and a curved stem. The edges were rough, but the center was shaped like a heart. Maylene touched it with her fingers. She didn't ask what it meant. She didn't need to. She wrapped it in cloth and placed it in the wooden box where she kept her children's first drawings and the last letter from her husband. And later, when she lay down to sleep, she didn't feel so alone. Something was changing. Not quickly, not loudly, but deeply. She noticed the way Jinn always stood between her and the wind, the way he handed her the water jar without being asked, the way he listened when she spoke, even when she only talked about herbs or firewood. He noticed the way she smiled at the children first, the way she always touched their foreheads before bed, the way her voice softened when she said his name. No one said anything, no promises, no plans. But hearts are not quiet things, even when mouths stay silent. The days became warmer. Spring moved through the valley like a quiet guest. Flowers opened without sound. Birds returned to the trees. The wind no longer carried ice. It carried scent of soil, of smoke, of new life. Jinn stayed, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because something in him no longer wanted to. He repaired the back wall, built a bench from old wood, taught Chen how to tie stronger knots, and showed Lian how to balance a bucket without spilling a drop. Maylene watched it all with quiet eyes. There was no moment, no grand event, when things changed between them, but she noticed the way he looked at her hands when she kneaded dough, the way he stood beside her at the fire, handing her the spices without her asking, the way he never entered the room unless she looked up and smiled first. One morning, she caught him outside, cutting bamboo into strips. When she asked what he was making, he only said, something for the children. But by evening, the strips had become a small gate, just enough to keep wild dogs from the path near the stream. When Chen saw it, he clapped and ran to touch every part of it. Jinn only watched with a soft grin, as if the boy's joy was enough. Maylene said nothing, but her chest felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with fire. That night, as she poured hot water into bowls, Jinn sat beside the window. The light from the lantern painted a golden edge along his jaw. Without turning, he said something she hadn't expected. "My name, it isn't really Jinn." She looked at him, surprised. "It was safer not to say it when I arrived." He paused. "I didn't think I'd stay this long." Maylin stood still for a moment, then walked over and set a bowl in front of him. "You don't have to explain," she said. He looked at her then, but she was already turning back to the fire. The wind outside moved through the trees like a breath that held something unsaid. He didn't tell her the truth that night, but she knew now that there was more behind his silence. Still, she didn't ask. Not because she didn't care, but because she did. Whatever life he had come from, whatever path had broken him before he fell at her door, it didn't matter. Not here. In this house, he was simply the man who had built the gate, the man who carved birds, the man who took the last piece of bread only after everyone else had eaten. That was enough. The next day, he brought home 2 fish from the stream, not large but fresh. The children were delighted. Maylin cooked them with ginger and wild onion. As they ate together, Leon leaned against Jinn's arm without hesitation. He didn't move away. His eyes softened. After dinner, while the children played outside with sticks and stones, Maylene washed the bowls and Jinn dried them. Their hands moved in rhythm. No words were needed. But just before the last bowl, she glanced up. "You can tell me," she said quietly, "when you're ready." He didn't answer right away, then he placed the cloth down and met her eyes. "I will." That night, she couldn't sleep. Not because she was afraid, but because her heart felt full. She lay in the dark, listening to the breath of her children and the creak of the house. She thought of the way Jinn had looked at her, not like she was broken, not like she was left over, but like she was someone whole, someone worth protecting. She closed her eyes, and in that silence, something inside her shifted. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was simply living, and maybe, just maybe, she was loved. In the early morning, before the sun had fully risen, Jinn stepped outside. Maylin followed, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. He stood near the stream, arms crossed, eyes on the hills. She walked slowly toward him. Neither spoke for a long time. Then he said, almost to the wind, "I had a name once, and a house with stone floors, and people who bowed when I passed." She stayed beside him. He looked at her, not with shame, but with quiet truth. "I left it all behind." She didn't ask why. She only said, "And yet you came here." He nodded once. "And here, I feel seen." The wind moved gently through the trees. Leaves danced in the light. They stood there together, not needing more. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive with thunder. It arrives like this, on soft mornings, in small words, in the way 2 people begin to breathe the same air without even noticing. The village was quiet that week. The rains had stopped and the paths were dry again. Traders returned to the road with carts full of herbs and silk. Children played near the stream. Old women gathered outside their homes to gossip and mend clothes. Maylin didn't join them, she rarely did. But she watched from a distance. Her eyes followed the way they moved, the way they talked, the way their lives seemed untouched by grief. She didn't envy them. She had her own rhythm now. A small life, but one that felt alive again. Jinn worked in the back that morning. He was chopping wood, steady and calm, with sleeves rolled up and sweat on his brow. Chen followed him, pretending to swing a small stick like a sword. Leon stayed closer to Maylin, arranging dried leaves in careful rows. It was an ordinary day. Until a voice came from the road. 2 men on horses stopped near the edge of the trees. Their robes were clean, their boots polished. One held a scroll, The other had a badge of gold. They looked out of place. They looked like the world Jinn had walked away from. Maylin stood. Boo, her hands froze in the middle of tying a bundle of herbs. Jinn came around the house, holding the axe low at his side. He saw the men. They saw him, the one with the scroll called his name. Not Jinn. A different name. A name with weight. Maylin didn't catch it. But Jinn did. He didn't answer. He didn't move. Then one of the men spoke louder. "You're needed at court. The prince is dying." Jinn said nothing. The wind shifted. The trees made no sound. Maylin felt something cold inside her chest. The men waited a moment longer, then turned their horses and left. They didn't shout, they didn't threaten because they didn't need to. They knew who he was. And now, so did she. That night, the house felt smaller. The fire burned low. The children were asleep, unaware. Maylin sat near the door, staring at the bird carving on the shelf, the one he had given her when he barely spoke. Jinn stood across the room. He didn't try to explain. He only said, "I thought I had more time." She nodded once. "You don't have to tell me everything." He looked tired, but not from the wound, from the weight he'd carried in silence. "I wasn't lying when I gave you my name. It just wasn't the whole truth." She waited. "I served the royal family, protected someone important. When a betrayal happened, I was blamed. I ran because staying would have meant death." He looked at her, then lowered his eyes. "I never planned to survive." But he had, because she had opened her door. The next morning, Maylin rose early, before the light. She boiled tea, folded blankets, moved slowly as if doing so would keep the world from changing. She expected him to leave. But when she turned around, he was still there. Not packing, not preparing, just sitting with his hands folded, staring at the steam from the tea. "You're not going," she said. He shook his head. "Not yet." She didn't ask why, but deep down, she hoped it was because of them. Because of Chen's smile, Leon's drawings, the way her hands had touched his chest without fear. Because of something small and real and quiet. That day, he built a fence. Not a big one, just around the herb patch to keep the goats away. Maylin watched from the doorway. She had no words for what she felt, but when he looked at her and smiled, she smiled back. And it felt like a promise neither of them had spoken. That night, they sat together. The children had fallen asleep, arms tangled together like roots. Jinn poured tea and handed her a bowl. Their hands brushed. Neither moved away. After a long silence, Maylin spoke. "You don't have to stay." His voice was low. "I know." She looked down. "But you're still here." He nodded once. Then he said the only words she needed to hear. "I want to be." Outside, the moon rose above the trees. Inside, a woman who had once lost everything sat beside a man who had once wanted nothing. And somehow, without trying, they had found each other. Not through chance, but through kindness, through presence, through the quiet miracle of choosing to stay. Summer came quietly. There were no fireworks in the sky, no grand festivals in the village. But the trees grew heavy with green. The river moved slower, and the air smelled of warm stone and honeyed leaves. The house, once silent, now breathed with life. Leon chased butterflies in the tall grass. Chen built wooden swords and shouted at trees like they were dragons. Maylin washed clothes in the stream and sang soft songs while the sun warmed her back. And Jinn stayed. He mended the roof before the rains came. He helped Maylin carry heavy baskets. He lifted Leon onto his shoulders so she could reach the apricots that grew too high. When the days grew longer, he sat on the steps in the evening and carved small animals for the children. Birds, rabbits, even a tiger. He never called it home, but he never called it temporary either. And Maylin no longer counted the days. She had stopped wondering when he would leave, because he hadn't. Some mornings before the children woke, she would find him standing in the mist near the tree at the edge of the field. His posture always straight, his eyes always distant, as if watching something that no longer existed. She never asked what he saw, but sometimes she stood beside him. They didn't speak. The fog would shift, and their shadows would blend into one, and somehow that was enough. One afternoon, Maylene made lanterns out of rice paper. It was an old habit, something she used to do before her husband left for war, a way to bring light into the home when the world outside felt too large. She showed Chen how to fold the paper, how to press the glue gently, how to keep the shape round. Lian added flowers made of colored thread, and Jinn watched. He didn't ask why she was making them, but when she placed one in his hands, already lit with a soft yellow flame, he held it like something sacred. That night, they placed the lanterns along the edge of the path, one by one, a trail of light leading from the stream to the front door. The wind moved through them, but none went out. Jinn stood beside Maylene, quiet as always, and in that glow, with the children laughing behind them, she realized her heart had stopped looking backward. It had begun to look forward. The next morning, a hawk circled overhead. Maylene noticed it before anyone else. Its wings were wide and smooth. Too smooth. It was trained, not wild. By midday, it dropped something near the house, a message folded tightly and sealed with red wax. Jinn found it. He read it once, then again. He didn't show it to Maylene. He didn't need to. She knew. Someone had found him. The days that followed moved slowly. Jinn spoke even less. He still helped with the chores, still told Chen how to hold the rake properly, still carried Lian when her legs were tired, but he moved like a man weighing the weight of two lives, the one he had left and the one he had built without meaning to. Maylene did not ask what was in the letter. She only made sure the tea was warm in the mornings, that the herbs were dry and wrapped, that the clothes were folded with care. She treated him the same way she always had, and that, more than anything, made it harder for him to go. On the third night after the hawk came, Jinn stood in the doorway while the lanterns flickered in the wind. Maylene sat at the table sewing a patch onto Chen's tunic. She didn't look up, but she felt him watching her. The moon rose behind him, casting his shadow across the floor. He didn't speak, and neither did she. There was nothing to say, because everything was already understood. When she finished sewing, she placed the needle down, stood, and walked outside. The wind was cooler now. Autumn was whispering at the edges of summer. She stood beside him. The path of lanterns still lit the way, but neither of them looked down it. They looked at each other, and they stayed that way until the candles burned. Two quiet figures in the dark, bound not by words, but by all the things they never needed to say. The leaves began to turn, just a little at first, a touch of gold at the tips, a whisper of red along the edges. The days grew shorter. The nights carried the scent of wood smoke and fallen earth. The children didn't notice the change, but Maylene did. She always noticed. She moved slower now, taking time with her hands, folding blankets twice instead of once, letting the rice simmer a little longer, watching Jinn from behind the steam of the morning tea. And Jinn, he had changed too. He no longer stood in the doorway for hours, no longer walked to the far tree at sunrise. Instead, he stayed closer. He helped Maylene more, sat with the children longer. His hands reached for things without thinking, her bowl, her basket, her shoulder when she stumbled on a stone. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was constant. And in that constancy, Maylene felt something grow deeper than words, something she had not dared to hope for since the day her husband left for war and never returned. Not just comfort, but presence. Not just kindness, but care. One morning, the hawk returned. This time, it did not land near the house. It circled once, twice, then disappeared toward the mountains. But the message it carried had already been delivered. Jinn saw it. He did not follow. He only stood outside the house for a long time, his arms crossed, his face still. Maylene didn't speak to him that day. She let him walk alone. He returned at sunset with a small bundle of dry flowers and placed them beside the window, where, Min liked to sit and braid string. He said nothing, but that night after the children were asleep, he placed something else on the table, a small scroll, old, faded. Malin looked at it for a long time before touching it. It was a letter from someone far away, someone who called him by his real name, someone who still waited for him to return. She didn't read more than a few. She didn't need to. She simply rolled it back up and handed it to him. Then she walked outside and looked at the sky and waited. He came to her later, standing beside the last lantern that still burned. The wind had picked up. Clouds covered the stars. Still, she didn't look at him. She looked forward, down the narrow road that led away from everything they had built. Behind them, the door to the house was open just enough to hear the slow breathing of two sleeping children. Jinn stood with his hands at his sides. No words were spoken, none were needed, because he didn't move, and she didn't turn away. In the morning, he began to build a new fence, stronger than the first. He didn't explain why. He just measured the wood, cut each piece with care, and worked until his shirt was soaked with sweat. Malin made extra soup that day. She didn't ask if he would stay, but when she laid out the bowls, she set 4 again, like she had every day since he arrived. And when he sat beside her, tired and quiet, she refilled his bowl without speaking. That night, he hung a lantern by the doorway, not a small one, a tall one with wooden sides and thick glass. It glowed brightly even after the wind rose, and when the flame flickered, he stepped outside and shielded it with his hands. Days passed, then weeks. The trees shed their leaves. The fields turned pale. The path remained quiet, and Malin no longer wondered if he would leave. She only wondered how long they could keep this world between them alive. Not because she doubted him, but because life had taught her not to trust stillness. Yet somehow, Jinn made it feel safe. He carved another gift. This time, a figure of a woman with a bowl in her hands. Strong shoulders, a steady face. He didn't say who it was, but he placed it on the shelf above her bed. And that was enough. As the cold returned, the fire inside the house burned longer each night. Not just for warmth, but to remind them of what they had built. Slowly, without promises, without names. Just 2 lives side by side, choosing to stay. Winter came. The wind returned with sharp teeth. Frost curled along the windows in the early hours. The trees stood bare and quiet, their branches like bones reaching toward the pale sky. But inside the house there was warmth, not just from the fire, but from the way Malin moved through each day with calm steps, soft hands, and a steadiness that had never left her even in the hardest years. From the way Jinn swept the floors in silence, or stirred the soup without being asked, or placed another log on the fire before it burned too low. From the sound of children laughing in their sleep. The world outside was cold, but their home was not. One morning, just before the sun rose, Malin stepped outside to fetch water. She wrapped herself in the thick shawl Jinn had stitched together from old cloth scraps. The path was frozen, and her breath showed in the air. She paused by the tree. The one at the edge of the field. The one where Jinn used to stand back when he thought he might leave. But now it held something new. A small ribbon, tied carefully to a low branch. Faded red, frayed at the ends, but clean. She reached out and touched it. It was hers. A piece of the old robe she used to wear the day he arrived. He had saved it and tied it there, like a memory that refused to disappear. Later that day, Malin lit candles inside the house. Not for any special reason. Not a festival. Not a holiday. She just felt the need for light. Jinn returned from the woods with dry kindling. His cheeks were red from the wind. He carried a quiet strength in his steps, the kind that didn't need to be seen to be known. He placed the wood beside the fire and took off his coat. She handed him a cup of warm tea. He held it for a while before drinking. The light from the candles made his eyes look softer, less guarded, like they had finally found rest. That evening, when the children were asleep, he sat beside her. The quiet between them had changed over time. It was no longer full of questions, Now it was full of knowing. She rested her hand near his on the bench. He didn't reach for it, but he didn't move away. That too was enough. Outside, snow began to fall. It came gently, like everything else between them had. No warning, no sound. Just white dust settling over the roof, the trees, the earth. Jinn stood and walked to the door. He looked out into the night, and then, without turning, he spoke. His voice was low, but clear. "I never thought I would belong anywhere again." Maylene remained seated, but her voice met his in the space between them. "You do now." In the days that followed, the snow thickened. The road disappeared beneath it. The trees stood still. No more hawks came, no riders, no scrolls, no questions. The world forgot him, but she never had to. One afternoon, Leon placed another bird carving on the windowsill. Chen carved one too, though his was missing a wing. They lined them up in a row, smiling at their creation. Maylene watched from across the room. Jinn stood beside her, arms crossed, quiet as always. But when he turned to look at her, she saw it in his face. The choice he had made, the one he kept making. Every morning he didn't leave. Every night he placed one more log on the fire. Every word he didn't say, but lived. Spring returned again. Soft winds moved through the fields. New herbs began to rise from the soil. The lantern Jinn had built still hung above the doorway, swaying gently. It had never gone out. One morning, Maylene opened the door to find the path swept clean. The baskets were full. The tea was already warm. And near the tree, the one with the ribbon, a new carving had been placed on a stone. Two figures, side by side, hands carved close, almost touching. But not quite. As if the sculptor had left space for what could not be shaped by wood alone, only by life. She smiled, then closed the door behind her, and inside, where it was quiet and safe and warm, they continued to live. Not as a widow and a stranger, but as a family, not by blood, not by ceremony, but by something quieter, something chosen. And that was enough. It was everything.
If this story meant something to you, if it stayed in your chest a little longer than you expected, then don't leave without subscribing. Here, we share quiet stories about love, loss, healing, and the moments that change everything, even when no one is watching. Leave a comment and let us know what part touched you most. Sometimes a single sentence can remind someone else that they're not alone. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story.